So, is it at all possible for you all to switch on your video? I can understand that some people may not be able to because of bandwidth, but practically everyone without video means that I'll be talking to a completely unseen audience. Even good. Some people are joining in. Even otherwise, virtual education has this problem that I can't see you. I can't look at your eyes. You can't look at my face. And if you remain invisible, that is very much worse than not having the class at all. So do please switch on your video, everybody who can, so that I can talk to real people and not to a black screen. Kavi, Sri Priya, lovely. 2 or 3 people have switched on the video. Thank you very much. So about death and dying, what a topic here. See, there's one historian, Philip Harris, talks about a transformation that happened. At one time, death was a social event. People knew that everyone would die. Death was accepted. Sometimes death was cruelly painful and with a lot of suffering, but people died with their families, surrounded by loved ones. Then death more and more became a medical event. And concurrently, the transformation from extended families to nuclear families happened. And here itself, we are people 2 generations apart. When I was a child, cattle were dying in the shed, people were dying, and children were not shooed away when they were dying. Excuse me, let me close the door to stop some noise. Accepting death as a natural, inevitable event. But with these 2 generations, I see Pranab and Sri Priya in front of me. 2 young people, 2 generations later. Many children grow up in nuclear families. There are deaths among the relatives, but children are no more part of it. When children go to college, they still have not seen somebody die. I had a colleague who was dying, and his son, about 2 weeks earlier, was sent away to an uncle's house so that he would not have to live with that unpleasantness. Personally, I think that's horrendous. That child cannot remember a final kiss from the dad and could not. Hey, Arun, there is a note from Galaxy MO1 saying that my voice is not clear. Is it only to Galaxy, or all of you are having a problem?
I think, sir, your voice is clear. Sister Clarita, what happened to you? I think your network connection is
okay.
poor. That's
okay. I hope if others also cannot hear, I must do something about it. But Let us see. So this transformation has happened. And that was 2 generations back. And then 1 generation later, in the 1990s, in the last quarter of a century, another transformation happened. That transformation was for all deaths to happen in intensive care units. So I quoted the historian Philip Harris from what he calls tamed death. Death has come transformed into forbidden death. People are not allowed to die. And when they eventually bloat that people die, that happens within intensive care units, and families are not a part of it. Is that a problem? Well, why? I mean, the families then do not have to go through the suffering of seeing the person in trouble. They see only the dead body. Is that a problem? What do you think? Anybody? Please share your thoughts. Who is going to talk to me? Vishwajit, what do you think? Is there a problem associated with that? Vishwajit, Kavi, I am specifically addressing people who to me look young. 2 generations away. There's at least one person who is just 1 generation away. Lovely, I can see that. Vishwajit, any comment?
No, sir.
You don't think it is a problem? It's okay. It's good for the family. They don't have to suffer. Is that it? There are 2 problems. One, before I go to my presentation, let me ask you this. We may have talked about it in the introduction. Think of me in the last month of my life. Like everyone else, I will also die. I am in my last, 3 months. What will be important for me? Preeti, what will be important for me? Car? No use. I let it ride in an ambulance. A big mansion with a swimming pool, I do not have that, but even if I had that, it is of no use. All that's important to me is one side of a bed. A Mercedes-Benz? No use. A lot of certificates and awards hung around me? No use. Lot of money in the bank? No use. What will be important for me? Somebody tell me, for a dying person, what would be important at that time of life? Sri Priya thinks it's peace of mind in the chat box. Anybody else? Spending time with family, says Clarita. Spending time with family, peace of mind, quality time with family, Pranab also says, peace of mind. So, excellent. Can I, peaceful atmosphere, can I add to that? It would be nice if I am physically comfortable, right? If I am in pain, if I am struggling to take breath, that's horrible. I certainly need physical comfort, and the rest of his time with the family, a final kiss to a loved one, a hug, somebody telling me I love you very much. Those are important things with me. But you see, everything that is important is taken away for the dying in intensive care units. You don't have physical comfort. On the other hand, physical comfort is destroyed and painful procedures are happening. Tube down the throat is one of the worst things that a conscious person can have. So no physical comfort, no love, no affection, no human touch. You only have mass creatures walking around you. 2/3 of elders in ICUs get disoriented and delirious and often agitated. So they have to be tied up. What a horrible way to die. Am I exaggerating? I'm an anesthetist by training. I was an intensivist for many years. I know what intensive care is like many of you. I know it's horrible. I know it can save lives and life is salvageable. I'm not challenging that. I'm talking about the situation where treatment is futile and still people are forced to die in intensive care units. That's what I'm challenging. Sorry. Arun, I am sharing my presentation. Okay. Hey, Arun, you have not enabled me.
Yes, sir.
Disabled participants.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think now you can share.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let us talk about end-of-life care and ethics, the relationship between the two. First, answer this question. I talked about my death. How many of you are able to think about your own death? Arun, please, let's have the poll.
I think now you people can see a poll on your screen, and please choose the most appropriate answer, and it is an anonymous poll. We are not recording any of your data. Only 38% are completed, therefore we have only 40 seconds to complete this poll. Okay, sir, we can end the poll.
Okay. So, half the people are not afraid. The other half includes people who are afraid and who are not sure. Let me tell you, as a healthcare provider, it's a strength to be able to think about your own death. See, this is the generation gap that I talked about. A time when people were not so afraid of death to a time when people are afraid of death. Those who are afraid of death will find it harder to provide emotional support to people who are dying. If you are able to accept it as the inevitable consequence of life, then you will be able to support people better. But now let me ask a question only to the people who said yes. Sorry. One of the people who said you are not afraid. Will you please read this paragraph, these 5 lines written by a journalist by name Sindhu? She wrote in the Hindu 5 years back. She was talking about her father's death in an ICU. Who is going to read it out? Somebody unmute and read it out for me. Sorry. Volunteer.
My 84-year-old father, my best medical procedure against his own wish, all skin and bones. He looked defenseless and at the mercy of doctors. His arms tied up, vulnerable and agonist.
Anybody who has seen an ICU, is this not familiar? This is what we are trying to avoid. Many people die in our country in pain and suffering abandoned. This woman died in a poor home. But even there, the daughter was able to come and be with her on their last days. She was able to have a few drops of water down her throat. Whereas anybody with any money in the pocket, there must be several people who have gone through this experience. In this hall, in this room, there must be numerous people who have gone through specifically this experience and would remember that with pain. I have a poll, but I am reluctant to administer the poll because so many of you were reluctant to think about your own death. So Arun,
Yes, sir. Can I learn the poll, sir?
Okay, do the poll. There's no compulsion. Those who want to answer can answer. Which is the better way to go?
Please look at the picture and select one answer. That is 1 or 2. First picture or second picture.
Sorry, Arun.
Yes,
It
sir.
says 1 and no. What is no?
Oh, sorry, sir, it's 2.
The second one is not no, it is 2.
2, sorry.
So to the 4 people who have so far answered no, did you really mean no? Arun, stop the poll. That question is confusing. We shouldn't continue that poll. Here are some principles of medical ethics. Autonomy, that is every person being master of oneself. No one is more important to you than yourself, as far as decisions are concerned. Some people may say, no, I won't take decisions. Let my son or daughter do. Colonel Lovely Anthony, let me ask you, of these 4 principles, which would you consider the most important? Autonomy, being master of oneself; beneficence, the healthcare system doing good; non-maleficence, not doing harm; and justice, being fair and equitable. I won't force you. If you have, you are muted. If you have something to say, you can say.
I feel it should be justice.
As far as Colonel Lovely Anthony says, being fair and equitable is the most important as far as the healthcare provider is concerned. You must get fair treatment. You must, the healthcare system must provide it equitably. People shouldn't be left behind. For many people, it may be something else. Is there any other opinion? Anybody? For many people, autonomy would be important. You people want to be in control. Some people will say, no, ask my wife, ask my husband, ask my daughter, ask my son. That's okay. So for some people, autonomy is very important. Beneficence is as far as the healthcare provider is concerned, we must do good, we should not do harm. All these are of all these are of importance. From person to person, some things may become more important. That's all. But as far as you are concerned, you have to be conscious of all of these. Whatever you do and whatever I do, we'll have to respect the importance of the person. That person must be given priority. We should do good, we should not do harm as far as possible. We should be fair and equitable. This is true in life. This is true in death. If more people were willing to think about your own death, I would have asked you, where do you want it to happen? Where, though, okay, I'll ask the question only to those who said they are not afraid to think about death. Okay. What is, where would you like it to happen? Anybody? Arun, please monitor the chat box.
Professor,
Anywhere, anytime, anywhere, the Lieutenant Colonel Lovely Anthony says, anytime, anywhere,
yes.
including intensive care unit, Lovely? Okay. For the majority of people are struggling with this. Most people are very young and do not want to think about those things even. Remember, our duty is to mitigate suffering. That should happen wherever suffering is least. In ICU, suffering is most. As far as possible, it should happen where the person wants it to be. Very rarely, people may respond like Colonel Anthony, Lovely Anthony, saying that let it happen anytime, anywhere. But I am okay with any time. I'm not okay with anywhere. I certainly do not want it to be in an ICU. If at all possible, I would like it to be where my family is. Remember, our duty of care of the healthcare provider as defined by an official body of Government of India is to mitigate suffering. Let us remember that. Our duty is to mitigate suffering. We can cure only sometimes. We will have to relieve often and comfort always. That's our primary responsibility. There exists no exception to this rule. So when you are treating somebody with any advanced illness, whether it be dementia or cancer, Parkinson's, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, whatever it be, our first and foremost responsibility is to keep the person as comfortable as possible. And that is physically and emotionally. The patient being kept as comfortable as possible, physically and emotionally. Does the patient know the diagnosis? Does the patient want to know? If I want to know, you have the responsibility to tell me. You means the healthcare system. Maybe you are in command, maybe the doctor is in command. Somebody responsible has to answer my questions. Uncertainty is very hard to bear. If I don't know what's happening, I'll be very, very anxious. If I am told, okay, you have cancer, you have limited time, I'll be sad, very sad. But over 2 or 3 days, I'll be able to reconcile to that and would say, okay, if I have only limited time, send me home. Please keep me pain-free. And I may tell my family, listen, I want to go to this place once more. I want to see so and so. Better get this man here quick. I want to write my will. It's very important for me to execute my will so that it will be clear. My children will be clear about what is to be done. I may even express wishes about how I am to be treated, cremated, buried, whether I want the rituals, etc. So we should try to find out as early as possible. Does the person want to know the diagnosis? And has he expressed views about where care is going to be? When patients do want to talk about it, I talk about it openly to them. I don't go and ask everybody, hey, where do you want to die? That's not what I mean. This is not a standalone thing. This is part of a process. When I sit down with them and ask them, you look very thoughtful. What are you thinking about? They may say, will I get cured? And that will lead us to the discussion about curability or incurability. If it's incurable, they may ask, how long do I have? And I would say, we really do not know, but it could be possible that the time is limited. So while we hope for the best, let us also prepare for a sudden event. And therefore, these are the things that you want to be done when you are still able to explore for an unfinished business. And then I'll say, as I said, let's hope you have a lot of time left. But if in between your condition worsens and you seem to be closer to the end, where would you want your end of life to be? In the hospital? Here we can look after you. Or would you want to be home? Those are things which are preferably brought up early. And many people are very clear about it. I'll send you all a link to an article. Arun, please remind me. Gina's article about how she talked about death to her mom and dad. That will be a very useful thing to read.
Okay,
So
sir.
we find out what the views they have expressed. And if the patient has an expressed wishes that are clearly to be taken into consideration. Discuss with the person and family regarding end-of-life care. Decide and take decisions and document your decisions. Write it down on the file. We don't have to necessarily have to make the person sign documents, but unless it's a legal document. But we should write down very clearly, this is what the patient says. This is why, these were his words. If possible, write it down in the patient's own words. Choice between home, hospital, and intensive care. Do you think some people may choose intensive care if given the choice for the place of death? I have known even that to happen. One woman told me, doctor, I know what's happening to me. I want to stay alive till the 24th. My son will be arriving on the 24th. Whatever you do, keep me alive at that time, till that time. I want him to see me alive. Otherwise, he'll be very sad. So some people may choose aggressive life support measures, and that's okay too with me. One thing that I want all of you to do, you may have to do many things that doctors want you to do, but wherever you have a choice, you must take some decisions. Who raised the hand earlier? Was it Preeti? Who is going to read this out to me? This was written by a man about his father's death. His name is Parthasarathi Shom. He was the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's chief advisor. And he wrote this angry article in the Business Standard where about his mother's death. Who is going to read it out to me? Preeti, earlier you raised your hand, offering to read. You want to read it out?
Yes, sir. Even the way of passing a specialist
Lost you.
You are unmuted.
You mean you are muted?
Yes, sorry, you are muted.
Okay. Even on the day of passing, a specialist recommended a liver function procedure. When asked if it would end the coma, the answer was in the negative. So Parthasarathi Shom is asking, when my mother was dying, you all had told me that she couldn't survive. You had all told me that she is close to the end. Then why were you pricking her arm with another needle? Why that additional pain was given to her? What was the point? Continue to read. Who is going to read it? Somebody, please.
Male
please.
nurses hurried about, pushing and shoving the inner body, rubbing any piece. Contemplation or prayer. Where was palliative care?
We do this in intensive care units. We turn people around, the 2-hourly change of position, endotracheal suction, so many things are done. It's necessary if the person can be saved. But in a person with advanced cancer, in a person with dementia, what's the point? So we will have to check what all can be stopped. Some medicines may have to be continued. Certainly, if they're painkillers, if there are cardiac medicines without which he may get headache, chest pain, if there is a diabetic who needs his diabetes medicines, continue them. But unnecessary things, somatostatins. One doctor, actually my friend in Trivandrum, got very angry with one of our doctors. The patient was his relative, a distant relative. He had come to visit. Our doctor was doing a home visit. And this senior doctor said, start antibiotic, start this medicine intravenously. And our doctor said, sorry, sir, we shouldn't do that. This is clearly the person who is dying. She is actively dying. And the specialist senior doctor was very annoyed. He wanted the antibiotics given because he suspected an infection. For somebody dying, as far as possible, let us avoid injections. If the patient cannot swallow, what will we do? Josen Shiba, what will we do? Will you put in a nasogastric tube? Certainly, some things we can do subcutaneous or rectally. But if it is a cefotaxime antibiotic, we cannot do it subcutaneously. We'll have to do it. We cannot do it rectally. You will need a vein. As far as possible, in somebody who is clearly dying, do not push in a nasogastric tube. It is more trouble. It's more suffering. The American Society of American Dementia Society has created guidelines where they clearly say, in people with dementia getting ill, do not put in nasogastric tubes or gastrostomy tubes. Feed them only as much as they can swallow, because you have seen this happening. You put in a nasogastric tube, the person pulls it out. So you tie the hands and feet up. Imagine how horrible it is to tie somebody up. You don't even do it to prisoners in jail. Just tying people up, confining them to a bed. That's one of the worst kind of nightmares that I have. So, lovely. When you say anywhere, anytime, I admire you for that. But I find it very difficult to accept that kind of ending, tied up in hands and feet in an ICU. So practically what we do, I'm only saying things that we practice. As far as possible, we'll give rectal medicines if they cannot swallow, or at most we'll use subcutaneous injections, which are not so painful. We avoid putting in central venous catheters, and towards the end of life, peripheral veins may be impossible to get. And I don't know, whether any of our nurses are attending this session. So generally, If a new nurse joins our unit and I ring up at night and say, how is so and so? They will say, pulse rate is 84, BP is 100/60, and the saturation, etc., etc. But after they have been with us for 2 weeks, if I ask, how is so and so, they will say, she is reasonably comfortable. She was sleeping most of the night. She got up and we gave her mouth care. Her daughter has come. She is with her. This is what they will say. Because those are the only things that are important. When I am dying, BP has to drop. Saturation has to drop. They are of no consequence. Giving noradrenaline infusion to a person dying of advanced cancer is a travesty. Should not be done. And even position change. I know ordinarily you would want to do it every 2 hours if I cannot move by myself. But you would give a pressure relieving mattress like an airbed. And then maybe you don't have to trouble me every 2 hours. Only once in a way I get to sleep. You can allow me to sleep for longer. Even at that time, we don't want pressure source, that is true. But between comfort and protocols, a balance is necessary. Very often, hospital protocols cause suffering. We should remember that in the event of a dying person, which is why in most countries, Western countries, they have protocols for end of life. One of the most important things, everybody, please remember this. If I am lying there, I seem to be unconscious. You don't think I am not responding to anything. But please continue to talk to me. Don't shake me and bother me, but say something like, uncle, we are going to turn you. Uncle, we are going to do this to you. Shake, maybe give you your skincare. I'm sorry, we'll try to do it with as little suffering as possible. So talk to me. Even if I am unable to react, you don't know whether I have any consciousness inside. Just assume I can understand and talk to me. And remember, palliative care. Remember Ludia, Jency, Shelby, Shaila, who is palliative care for? Not only the patient, also for the family. So remember the family and particularly remember children. Help the family members to communicate with the children. Children very often have huge fears. A grandparent is dying and they start thinking, oh my God, he will die. That means my dad also may die. My mom also may die. Then who will I have? Will I also die? They have all these questions inside them. Remember to explain things to them in language they will understand. And by all means, facilitate religious rites. Rites means rituals. I had this personal experience in a Trivandrum hospital. I was a consultant there and I had gone. I was called in to see in the middle of the night this person. She had, the family and she wanted to die at home, but she became breathless that night and was rushed to the hospital. So when I went there, there was this drama happening there. The woman was in the ICU. The family wanted her to have last communion. And here was the nursing chief standing there and he would not allow the priest to go in. He was telling the priest, you cannot go into the ICU. That's now against the rules. I just touched the person's arm and said, I had no business there. I was only a consultant from outside. I was not an authority. I said, wait a minute, this is important. I took the priest by hand, opened the door and took him in. made it happen. Because for him or for her and for the whole family, the last communion is so important. So if there are religious rites, even in hospital, they have to be facilitated. As far as possible, allow the family to be with the person. And we'll continue to look after the health and emotional needs of carer and family. Very sad thing that I sometimes find is I see a patient in the hospital for a week. Then I ask the spouse, how about you? Do you have any health issues? And the man will say, oh, that doesn't matter, doctor. Her life is at stake. That is what is important. But I'll insist, tell me, do you have any medical issues? Are you a diabetic, hypertensive? And then you find that the person has stopped anti-diabetic medication for a week. The next thing you know, he's going to drop down unconscious there. So we will look after the family also. And now we come back to the situation. So this man had this intensive care being done to him. We are agreed that futile and inappropriate artificial life support measures cause physical, psychological, and social suffering to patients and families, and that palliative care is the humane alternative. Are we all agreed on this? No, even if there is disagreement, do please speak out. Okay, if artificial life support is such a big problem, how about euthanasia or mercy killing? In India, it is illegal. It is not allowed by law, but in many countries, this is permitted. Switzerland, Netherlands, several states in USA, more and more Canada, it is permitted. It is illegal in this country, and therefore, whether it is right or wrong is not a matter for discussion. You cannot do anything illegal anyway. But let me ask you, if for this man whose picture was shown, we withdraw his beyond recovery, all specialists have agreed that has no chance of coming back to life. If we stop the ventilator, will that be euthanasia? If we stop the ventilator, will that be mercy killing? Either speak out or put your answer in the chat box.
No, it won't, because it is in an artificial setup.
Who did that answer come from? Please give me your name.
That's from Sister Shelby.
Sorry, Shelby. I totally agree with you. Not only I, this is what ICMR also says, that euthanasia is killing someone. Allowing natural death is not euthanasia. When you are stopping the ventilator, as Shelby said, we are only allowing natural death. Okay, that's a distinction. When you withhold or withdraw a ventilator, that is not euthanasia. Some people use the word passive euthanasia. In fact, even in a Supreme Court verdict of 2018, that word came up. But as ICMR says, that term should not be used. Euthanasia is killing. In USA, they started doing this passive euthanasia, they called it. That is, the doctors and nurses set up an infusion maybe potassium chloride, something that will kill immediately. But allow the patient to open the tap. They call it passive euthanasia. But that is still euthanasia, that is still killing. And in India, clearly that is illegal. So what will you do? We should tell people the truth. Only a realistic treatment option should be given. No sense in saying that, okay, we can also try ECMO. This happens now to people. The richest people, when they get COVID and are dying, is taken to the only hospital in Trivandrum which has extracorporeal membrane oxygenator. So that at an enormous cost, people die, still die after a few days. Only what is useful you should offer. Allow time. You tell the family, look, this is futile. I think we should stop the ventilation because it's not helping him. You cannot expect a decision immediately from the family. They are people who love the person. They will want some time. So do not escalate treatment. Do not add on more artificial life support measures. Continue whatever you are doing. Give them time. If they say, okay, non-invasive ventilation is okay, but don't put a tube in, that's also fine. Do not bring in the question of money. Suppose you say, we can put them on a ventilator and that may keep him alive for a few more days, but that's going to be expensive. Then they are being emotionally blackmailed and saying, money doesn't cost, doctor. You do whatever you want to do. We will pay the money. And making them sign unnecessary papers. They feel like they are signing a death warrant. If anything is necessary for a consent, do that, but not unnecessarily. And here is a very important point, everyone. So long as the patient is alive, never say there is nothing more that can be done. Doctors very often say that nothing more can be done. What they mean is nothing more can be done to cure the disease. But you know, every one of you know that so long as there is life, there are things that you can do. Pankaj, Meera, Pinju, you know this. Even on the last day, last few hours, there are things that you can do, like holding a hand, wiping a tear, even giving them a loving touch. Those are important. Treating their pain is important. Continuing to give them care for the body is important. So there is no situation where nothing more can be done. There is always something to be done. So what will you tell the family? You won't say nothing more can be done. Instead, you will say, though he cannot be cured or though she cannot be cured, we will continue to do whatever can be done to keep the person comfortable. In a hospital where I worked for a couple of years, there many hospitals have this step-down ICU, you know, the critical care unit or intensive care unit, and there is a so-called step-down ICU or HDU, high dependency unit, where you don't still put the person on intubation and ventilator, but you may still give non-invasive ventilation, etc. Next to that, we created a palliative care unit. And there was a counseling room for everyone. There was a designated place, comfortable place, where the staff could talk to the family. And a medical social worker was assigned to be available to talk to the family all the time, to answer their questions. When he did not know the answers, he would get it from the staff. But every day, the treating doctor would meet the family in the counseling room, even if they don't have asked questions. And because from high dependency unit, this person who is seriously ill is transferred to a palliative care unit, the family did not feel like, oh, they have all given up. They are continuing to care for them. That's what they will feel. Before I conclude, let me also tell you about advanced directives. We live in a country where if you have money in the pocket, everyone is put on a ventilator before death. You should know that this is not happening in the richest countries. I have the data. I'm not showing it now, but in USA, more than 75% of people, if treatment is considered futile, have artificial life support withdrawn. The same thing happens in Western European countries, including UK. Whereas in India, for 78% of patients who go on a ventilator, they die on a ventilator. So what have I done? I have written an advance directive. I have signed a document expressing that if I have a disease from which cure is unlikely, I should be offered palliative care. If possible, I should be kept at home, but I should not be taken to an intensive care to die. Artificial life support measures like endotracheal intubation should not be done to me, and that I hereby sign also a DNR order. Do not resuscitate me. Now I have signed this, but more importantly, I have talked to my family about it. Let me tell you, an advance directive is of no use if your family is not agreeable. Because imagine the real life situation. Legally, the Supreme Court of India has validated advance directives. Legally, if I have written that, that is binding on the doctor. But in the practical world, you know what they say? Living people go to court, dead people do not go to court. I have signed it, but I cannot go to the court and argue for me, case against you. Doctors will be worried about the family members. So, advanced directives will be useful only if the family also understands it. I have talked to my wife, I have talked to both my sons. They all agree that this is my wish, and they have agreed to respect that wish. So I'll remind you, for me, when my time comes, my autonomy, what I want done, should be given importance so long as I am competent to take decisions. Everything should be for my good, and that artificial ventilator on the last day is not for my good. You should not do me the harm of shoving a tube down my throat when it will be of no use. And whatever you are doing, as Colonel Lovely Anthony said, should be fair and equitable. And what happens now that palliative care has reached people in their own homes? Where in so many places in Kerala, home care is available, that more and more people are able to live in their homes. And when the time comes to die in their homes, they get care with respect. When we talk about ethics, respect is important. I see Pankaj and Meera in front of me. I don't know you, Pankaj and Meera. I haven't met you. But one thing I know, you have something in you that I do not have. This I have already said in another session. It is my responsibility to treat you with respect, for just the respect due to another human being. We will not be judgmental. Whether the man is an alcoholic or not is of no importance to me. My duty is to care for that person. I will preserve their confidentiality. Whatever they have told me, I'll keep to myself, and I'll treat them with dignity. These are also basic ethical principles. And I'll end with this statement from the physician Paracelsus, who lived 4 centuries back. The most fundamental principle of medicine is love. This is Dr. Harish caring for somebody who is very sick. And the love that he gives the person is most important, because then when you are treated with love, a lot of things can be born. I'll stop there. We have some more time before the case presentation for questions. Are there questions in the chat box, Arun? Or unmute and speak. Before I take the questions, Lovely, you had earlier said you have thought about it, and anywhere, anytime, anything is okay with you. Would you like to tell everyone, you are a senior person, have seen life, have seen a lot of nursing practice also. Would you like to talk to everybody for a minute about what you feel?
Sir, actually, thank you, sir. Actually, I served in army. So, like, from, like, we were prepared actually to face life as well as death anytime. So I think I still carry that with me. And I always feel actually, and also with the Christian religious upbringing, I feel it's God's will. Whatever is happening, wherever it is, I should be ready. Like I should not be having any choice. So as far as I feel, I do my whatever I can do to best of my ability. And when the time comes, whatever it is, I'm ready. Like it's my philosophy. Like I don't think I should be feeling.
I hope everybody gets your strength of will and are able to see it like you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody, any questions or comments?
I think there are no comments, sir.
But that's very unusual, isn't it, Arun? At this course, usually in our courses, after the first 1 or 2 sessions, people are reluctant to talk. Usually people start talking, interacting. People are looking very serious. Aradhya, Jensi, Sulekha, Pranab, any questions? Rajani of Rajani Sharma. Rajani from Himachal Pradesh?
No, sir. Dr. Rajani is working in Varanasi.
Okay.
At a Memorial Institute as a assistant nursing.
Okay. I know another Rajani Sharma, that's why I asked. Anybody, any question?
Any questions from participants or any comments? This is our second lab session and SAR's last session. Sister Alice?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Why can't we have a place where in between ICU and home, like a place where the family and the patient can be more comfortable? Because what happens many times, what I have felt actually is the family feels when they're cared at home, the others may be telling they are not taking them to the hospital. They are scared about, they are worried about what others will think of. Like many times I have, means people have shared this type of concept. I remember one of my teacher was admitted in Baby Memorial Hospital in ICU. I went to, he has taught me when I was in high school. So I went to meet him. So because I took special permission, went inside the ICU since I was working in one of the college of nursing there and I knew somebody there. So he told me, Lovely, actually what I want is you tell that doctor to take me out. So I went and told the son, actually, Sarah told me like this. He told, no, we cannot be taking home. We may not be able to take care of. Then I went and requested, actually. So then I told actually, you arrange a room where the family and sir can be comfortable. So we took permission and shifted him to one of the room. And I think we shifted him about morning 10 o'clock. And by evening 3 o'clock, peacefully, even in my presence, he died. Like it was happily. He was ready to go, but he told, I want to be in midst of all of my children. All his children he was a very affectionate person, and all his children were there actually. And actually, they were also very good. Actually, they have given a room where all of us could be there. Like we knew nothing else could be done. So it was nice. Like that is set up. Maybe I feel means we should think more of that between home and between ICU, something. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Lovely. You have brought up a very important point. Everybody you heard, a man wanted to be with his family on his last day. A colonel from the Indian Army had to intervene to make that happen. Why can't that simple last wish, even to the prisoners in prisons, even for the person who is condemned to be death by hanging, one question is asked, do you have a last wish? So that man has it given to him, but not any of us in an ICU. Our last wish is not satisfied. The reasons, one, Lovely also mentioned this. One of the reasons is the social pressure. Because though we have said repeatedly, okay, I don't want to be taken to hospital. Let me still be here. Let the home care team come and see me when they can. I'll stay here. What will happen? My cousin will come, will ask my son, hey, why are you keeping him here? You are worried about spending money. You don't want to spend money even on your dad. And the social pressure drives people. Lovely, I'll tell you what I do routinely. I anticipate this. When there's a discussion with the family, I'll tell them, look, you have a problem coming up. You now think you will keep him at home. He wants to be at home, but people will come and criticize you. You have to make up your mind right now that you will do only the best thing for your dad. You won't do anything to please somebody else. But if they prepare them in advance, then they will, naturally, that makes sense, doesn't it? Of course, I should do the best for my mom, my dad. That is what they will decide. So the social pressure is so much. That's one major problem. The second problem is it's also nice for the hospitals to have the intensive care units full. Lovely Anthony mentioned about a place where people can be kept. So as I said earlier, even when we have a dying person already in an ICU, what we do is, what I used to do is, when I was in a place with intensive care units, no longer, that's where the palliative care unit comes in, a halfway place. So the patient is not far away. It is not as if the patient is rejected. It's not as if nothing is being done, but the transfer to the palliative care. So that can be done. Hospices generally are places. Palliative care and hospice are almost the same. Hospices are palliative care centers for people with limited life expectancy. There are also so many of them. The Cipla Hospice in Pune, Karunashraya in Bengaluru, Jeevodaya in Chennai, Shanti Avedana in Mumbai, Goa, and Delhi. All these are hospices where people are allowed to have a compassionate death. But hospices have limited number. They are expensive. Expensive to run. So it is not possible to have a huge number of hospices catering for everybody in India, because we are not a rich country like the UK. So that may not be feasible. What we can facilitate more is, we certainly allow people to be in our palliative care center when they are close to death as inpatients, but we can also facilitate the death at home by preparing the family in advance. It's already 7 minutes past 4. I'm sorry I went on talking. My apologies, Arun. You should have your case presentation now.
Sir, there is one more question comment. How important is awareness about EOLC for home nursing professionals? Sir?
Not only for home nursing, who did the question come up from?
From Sri Priya.
Sri Priya, not only for the home nursing people, anywhere there seems to be public awareness. There needs to be public awareness. The time is, as I said, today, death is a stranger. People have to accept dying. We may not all be able to accept it as much bravery as lovely Anthony, but if it is talked about, if it is discussed, it is less fearful and plans are easily made. So there is certainly, home nursing services certainly need to know. And there are also these elder care homes. Most elder care homes, they look after people for 5 years, but eventually when they are dying, they are sent to a hospital and then to an ICU. That's horrendous. So you are absolutely right, Sri Priya. That awareness is very important. But then it's awareness. More discussions about this in the among the public is vitally important. By the way, you should know that 24th of August is the death anniversary of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who did the maximum work about death and dying and worked all her lifetime to make it understood and accepted. Okay, Arun, case presentation, please.
Okay, sir.
Arun, thank you for doing it at short notice because Dr. Molly Matthew could not join us.
Okay. Okay, once again, good afternoon to all. On behalf of Sister Molly Matthew, today I'm going to present the patient story. Sister Molly Matthew was working in SUT hospital. At present, she is not working anywhere. So it's an old case. The patient is no more nowadays. The patient died on March 5th of March 2019. So going to the case presentation, about the patient details, that is 54-year-old male patient having diagnosed with the oral squamous carcinoma of the anterior 2/3 of the tongue and floor of mouth, metastasis to the cervical lymph nodes. The presenting complaint of patients, a feeling that something caught in the throat, difficulty swallowing or chewing, difficulty moving the tongue, numbness of the tongue, difficulty articulating. And about the history of illness, patient is a known case of smoker and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and a silvery patch was noted on his tongue 2 years ago, that's end of 2016, but he did not immediately seek medical attention and continued to smoke and consume tobacco because patient is not aware about this condition, so he continued his old habits. And in examination, physical examination, that is systemic inspection, in palpation, the extraoral soft tissue are examined first, followed by the intraoral soft tissue. Any deviations such as swelling, tenderness, or fluctuations are recorded. And treatment and significant investigation. The first one is surgery, that is surgical resection of the tongue has done, and extensive resection of bone and soft tissue also done. And significant investigation like endoscopy, X-ray, fluoroscopy, CT scan, blood investigation, and biopsy are done. About the psychosocial aspects of patient, he was the only earning member of the family. The treatment of the disease is expensive. He has 2 children, both of whom are college students. Hence, the family suffered from financial problems that resulted in him getting depressed. After the surgery, he had severe pain and could not talk and hence felt hopelessness, and fear of death. About the medication of patient, that is injection midazolam 4 grams subcutaneously, bolus and continuous midazolam infusion 1.5 milligram per hour. After 30 minutes, second bolus of midazolam given and infusion increased to 2 ml per hour. 2 days after, an eventful dose of midazolam infusion 5 milligram per hour was administered, and metronidazole gel for local apply, and injection morphine and antidepressant given in few days after the surgery. Main concern about do not resuscitate concern received from family. They choose to continue with the symptomatic treatment, and patient and family refused to feeding tube. They elected for comfortable care because he was suffering greatly, and this caused severe distress to his dear wife and loving children, who could not bear to see him suffer in this manner. And about the summary, a 54-year-old male history of COPD at the end of 2018 was diagnosed with oral squamous carcinoma of the anterior 2/3 of the tongue and floor of mouth, which had unfortunately metastasis to the cervical lymph nodes. He has been treated with a surgical resection of the tongue, extensive resection of the bone and the soft tissue on 6th February 2019. He refused radiation and chemotherapy. 3 weeks post-surgery, his condition became worse. So the family chose a palliative care on 27th February 2019, referred the patient for palliative care. Injection midazolam infusion 5 milligrams subcutaneous per hour were administered up till his death. On 5th March 2019, he died peacefully and his family at his bedside. Anyway, these are the discussion points. The family of an end-of-life patient whose condition is deteriorating, depressed, what are the possible humanitarian measures that could be taken in this such situation? And the second discussion point is, what advice could be given to the family to tackle the financial crisis they are facing? And thank you.
Put the discussion points back on. Thank you. Discussion from the audience, your comments.
Yes, sir, we need to break the silence. We expect some comments or suggestion discussion from the participants. Sister Shelby, are you there? Shelby, ma'am?
Yeah, I am here. Yeah. Okay, so the first one, the family of an end-of-life patient whose condition is deteriorating, depressed. What are the possible humanitarian measures that could be taken in such situation? I suppose as the family has came into a term that their loved one is going to die, basically he is on the end of life stage. I suppose they have to give them the console that, well, the cure is not possible, but of course the care we can give until the death, and then we can try our best to keep them comfortable as much as they can, and have a quality of life as they wanted to have for that person. From the palliative care, we can do that. I suppose that is the console we can give to the family and the patient, because as we have seen that the cure is not possible anyway with this patient. So we have to promise on the care that we can give to them.
Arun, you can lead. I'll jump in whenever I want to.
Yes, sir, no problem.
Excellent comments there from Shelby. Arun, you want to, when you want me to do anything for anything, ask me.
No, sir, you have any suggestion, any comments means you can leave and go, sir, no problem. You can leave.
I am going to, Arun, I let us share my screen again.
Yes,
In a
sir.
minute, I'm not ready yet. Yeah, okay. Share screen. Who is going to read it out for me? This is from about Julia Newberger. Somebody read it out aloud for me, please.
May I?
Yes, please.
Yes, ma'am.
The pain of loss is still immense, but to feel that everything that could have been done was done, that those who cared did so with knowledge, professionalism, devotion, and even love, and that the person died without pain, comfortably with those they loved around them, is to feel immense gratitude and a curious humility. Julia Newberger.
So this is what we can do for those people. There are some things we can do. There are some things that we cannot. Here is a success story. Not every patient is as lucky as Modi's patient. Here was a person who had huge bad luck. The surgery was extremely expensive, and the family had a financial crisis. Now, this is one of the things that we will remember. You yourself may not be able to do much about it unless this gets discussed more. I don't know if I told you earlier in another session, in India is among the worst 12 countries where healthcare destroys people. According to World Bank data, India and Bangladesh are among 12 countries where maximum destruction of families occurs by healthcare costs. Shameful for healthcare in India. 55 million, 4% of our population gets pushed below poverty line in a year. Here is one of them. The patient that Modi talks about is possibly one of the 55 million people fall into debt trap. At this point, that is not something to be reversed. But if adequate discussions happened early enough, if the patient was told what was the likely outcome before the surgery, you cannot always know. Doctors cannot be gods. They may think that the patient can be, there's a good chance and we may go ahead. That may be wrong. But when you know, very often surgery is offered to people without telling them it's incurable. The surgery is only palliative. It will only help to buy some time. It is not going to cure you. They have a right to know that. And many patients will say, in that case, I don't want it. Sometimes people still say, okay, go ahead, because they can't bear the pain. Instead, if you are offering palliative care, many people may accept that. So that should have happened at one time. The other thing that we can do about the financial crisis in this context, we cannot raise money to pay back everything that everybody has borrowed. It's not possible. But you can avoid some things. What are the consequences of that financial destruction? People get desperate. Family members also get disappointed and may go into depression. We are even now treating a man with chronic pain who was in such pain after a hernia surgery because of some scar pain that he actually attempted suicide. The consequence was, did I tell you about him already? Stop me if I told you this already. He attempted suicide. His son left his job in a Gulf country. He had gone only 1 year back and he was still in debt. So he left the family and came back. He left the job and came back. His daughter did not have money to complete her nursing education and had to drop out of college. But once we come to know of this, there are a few things that we do. We can't pay back all the debt. Not possible. But we can make sure that the children's education continues. If you give them money, they will use it to pay back the money. Instead, suppose we are offering to support the education, a lot of children will get educated. Currently, our team is looking after the education of about 300 children from families of patients. We may also help them sometimes. It's not easy, but when possible, to find some kind of a occupation, vocation. But it is also important because as we inquire into these things, we are also conveying to the patients, to the family, we care for you. That's important. That somebody cares is important. Yeah. Gen Z says many people who don't know about importance of palliative care. Yes, that's widely known. Even when it is known Gen Z, many people think it's only for dying people. So here, financial crisis, don't abandon them, don't blame them. At least support children's education. Make sure that they have enough to eat. That happens sometimes. Our team does pay for the food kits of about 100 people because otherwise they would starve. But look after those things if possible. Most importantly, don't abandon them. And earlier, as Gen Z says, if we had talked about palliative care in advance as an alternative, they may not have undergone a surgery that is not curative. Gen Z, do you think we can do anything else about improving awareness?
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, I am also working in palliative care.
Where are
When
you
I
working?
come to palliative care nursing, only that I know about the importance of palliative care. Before I was worked as a staff nurse in many of the hospitals. When I am working in palliative care, then I can understand one thing that even from our society, they don't know the importance of palliative care. They only think that the palliative care treatment is given only for the patients who are aged or bedridden patients like that. I am also faced the same situation in my life because my mother-in-law was bedridden and she have a lot of complaints. Even I got pressure from the society to take her into the hospital. But me and my family also want to treat her in our home with the help of a palliative care. But the society, the people from the society think that we take care for the patient in our family because we don't want to take a better care for her. Like that, people thinking. I think if we can give more awareness to the people in the society, if there is an option like that, it would be better.
This is Gen Z's appeal is to everybody. Talk about it, write about it, organize discussions about it. People have to know. When people know about palliative care, they very often have wrong assumptions. Many people, as Gen Z said, think it's only for people who are dying. So it totally agreed. Only problem is many people do not want to talk about it. Many people, because it's death, unpleasantness, suffering. You know the famous Amitabh Bachchan's program KBC, Kaun Banega Crorepati. So they had once decided to give him visibility to palliative care. So their team shot over 4 or 5 days, shot videos, prepared everything. He did in KBC, he did. They have this monthly program. I had a monthly program about a good cause. So he talked about briefly about palliative care. But in the evening, it was telecast. When the first re-telecast in the morning did not include this. So we inquired and found that the directors of the television company actually decided that it was too unpleasant a subject and did not want it aired in KBC. So there is a general feeling that people do not, there's a general reluctance to think about what people consider inauspicious. That's part of the problem. So we have 2 minutes more for the last question. We look after people in palliative care, mostly with incurable conditions. Only once in a way we help with pain relief or psychosocial support for people during curative treatment also, but mostly it's for people with incurable diseases. And even though we are not saved a loved one's life, usually people come back to us. They are thankful to us for what do we do? I said earlier that the message from Paracelsus, the most fundamental principle of medicine is love. Treat them with love and care. And I hope when my time comes, one of you will be looking after me and you will give me that kind of tender care with love and affection. Thank you very much. Arun?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to close?
Yes, sir. Any other comments from the participants? Any suggestion? Otherwise, we are going to wind up this session. Sir, I think we can wind up the session, sir, because thanks messages are coming. Thank you, sir.
Okay, your feedback session.
Okay, thank you, Rajavar sir, for this wonderful session, and thank you, everyone. So now I'm going to share the feedback. Please take a minute and do it now. It's a request. And next week we have our last session, that is basic nursing issues. I think till now we didn't receive any case presentation from your side. So I request some of one will come voluntary and take a case presentation, and we expect some testimonials from your side also. Okay, thank you.